The wind in this high country had teeth, and it used them. It was late in the year 1881, and Eliza Morrison felt the cold trying to get at her bones. She kept her head down, the brim of her late husband's hat pulled low, but the wind found the space between her collar and her jaw, stinging the skin raw. Her horse, a sturdy sorrel gelding named Barnaby, blew out a cloud of steam, tossing his head as they broke through another drift. This was Wyoming territory. It was not a place that offered easy passage in December. She had left the small cluster of buildings that called itself a town just after dawn, and now the sun, a weak, pale disk, was already starting to dip behind the western peaks. The light was flat and gray, making the world look like a charcoal sketch of itself. Everything was white or black or the color of iron. The creeks were frozen solid, their surfaces a milky, bubbled ice. The pines were heavy with snow, their lower branches buried. The silence was vast, broken only by the rhythmic crunch of Barnaby's hooves and the high, thin shriek of the wind in the ridges. Eliza's fingers were long past aching. They were just numb, stiff claws inside her wool mittens, curled around the stiff leather of the reins. She had been riding for 6 hours. She knew she should be afraid of the cold, but mostly she just felt tired. The numbness in her hands felt like a relief. It was a match for the numbness she felt inside. She shifted in the saddle, the movement stiff, tucked inside her thickest wool coat. Pressing against her ribs was a small oilcloth packet. Inside were the papers. The papers were the reason for this ride. The land claim, signed by James himself over a year ago. The receipts from the land office in Cheyenne. Proof of improvements made, and tucked in with them, a newer piece of paper. A flyer from a man in town. A Mr. Silas Croft. He called himself a land agent. His flyer, printed in smart black letters, offered to buy parcels from settlers who had found the climate unsuitable. He had offered to buy her cabin, cheap. A woman alone has no business this high up. Mrs. Morrison, he had said yesterday in his cramped, overheated office. He smelled of stale tobacco and sweat. Especially not with winter setting in proper. You take my offer. It's generous. Get yourself back east before the real snows hit. He had looked at her not like a widow, but like an opportunity, like a claim to be jumped. Eliza's jaw tightened. She had not come back east. She had come up the mountain. She had to see the cabin one last time. She had to know what she was selling. Or perhaps, she thought, a cold dread washing through her. She just had nowhere else to go. The town had suffocated her. After James was murdered, the air had grown thick with whispers. James, her husband, killed not by the land or by Indians, but by a bullet in the back over a poker game gone bad in the dim, smoky light of the Red Dog Saloon. It was a dirty, stupid way to die. The grief had been sharp, yes, but the shame had been worse. The community had turned. James had been loud, and he had been careless with his money, and when he died, the whispers started. They said he was driven to it. They said he had debts. And then they turned their whispers on her. The women, led by the preacher's wife, suddenly found her company distasteful. They stopped meeting her eye at the mercantile. They gathered their skirts when she passed. She was 24 years old. She was healthy, and her husband was dead. She was a problem they did not know how to solve. The men they looked to, their looks were different. They stared at her in the street, their eyes lingering on her hands, her throat, her hips. They saw a woman, unprotected. They saw the rumors, the ones that said she had been too friendly with the hired men James had brought on to help with the cabin. It was a lie. She had been lonely. She had offered coffee. She had smiled, because it was her nature to smile. She had not known, until James's death, that a woman's smile could be seen as an invitation. She had not known it could be twisted into a weapon against her. After the funeral, the rumors had become fact in the town's mind. She was the young widow who had not known her place, who had driven her man to drink and cards. She was the woman who, perhaps, had been relieved to see him go. So she ran, not east, to a family that had disowned her for marrying James in the first place. She ran to the only place she owned, the cabin, the very place James had built, the place that was the source of all the rumors. She would go there, see it, and sell it to Mr. Croft. She would take his cheap offer and she would just disappear. A howl, thin and sharp, cut through the wind. Eliza pulled Barnaby to a halt. The horse's ears snapped forward, swiveling. She scanned the ridge to her left. Nothing, just the gray rock and the wind-blasted snow. Then she saw them. Tracks. Not deer, too large, too deep. A single, purposeful line of tracks, crossing the path she was on. They were fresh. The wind had not yet softened their edges. Wolves. A shiver, entirely separate from the cold, ran straight down her spine. They were close, and they were hunting. "Up, Barnaby," she urged, her voice a dry crackle. She kicked her numb heels into his sides. The horse needed no encouragement. He lunged forward, breaking into a jarring, slipping trot. The land was rising steeply now. They were close. Another hour passed. The gray light was turning to a deep, bruised purple. She could barely see the trail. She was guiding Barnaby on memory alone, the memory of the one summer she had spent up here with James, the summer before he died. Just when she thought she had missed it, that she would be forced to spend the night in the open, Barnaby nickered. Through the swirling snow, she saw it, a dark shape against the white, the roof line. The cabin. It was intact. James had built it well, with thick, notched logs, but it looked small and terribly alone. Snow was drifted 4 feet high against the north wall and halfway up the door. The small porch was buried. A single wooden shutter on the one window was hanging by a hinge, banging a dull, rhythmic thud in the wind. Eliza slid from the saddle, her legs so stiff they nearly buckled. She landed hard, sinking to her knees in the drift. The cold shot up through her trousers, burning her skin. "We're here, boy," she whispered, patting the horse's neck. "We're here." She tied his reins to a low-hanging pine bough, where he was somewhat sheltered from the wind. She would tend to him, get him into the small lean-to, after she had secured the cabin. The door was stuck. She had to put her shoulder to it, pushing against the weight of the snow and the frozen wood. It finally gave with a groan, scraping open just wide enough for her to slip through. She fell into the darkness, the smell of cold ash, dust, and mouse droppings filling her nose. It was colder inside than it had been outside. The wind found every crack in the chinking. The single room was a pit of shadows. She fumbled in her saddlebag, her mittens clumsy. Her numb fingers found the tin of lucifer matches. She struck one. The small flame flared, blue, then yellow, shaking in her hand. She saw the hearth, a pile of kindling, left by James, still stacked beside it. She knelt, her knees cracking. She held the match to the driest, smallest slivers of wood. She blew gently, her breath a white plume. The flame wavered, caught, and then died. "No," she said. The word was sharp. She struck another match. This time she cupped her hands around it, shielding it with her own body. She fed it a sliver of bark. It caught. She added another. She blew, a long, steady, desperate breath. A small, orange flame licked up the wood. She did not move. She added larger pieces, one by one, until she was sure. The fire crackled, fighting back against the cold. It threw a weak, flickering light across the room. She saw the small table James had built, overturned. The one chair, lying on its side. Her small cot, bare, the thin mattress stained with mildew. The wind howled outside, a living, screaming thing. It sounded like the whispers. It sounded like all the voices that had told her she was wrong. Eliza Morrison sat on the cold floor, wrapped her arms around her knees, and let the tears come. They were hot on her cheeks. and then they were freezing. She felt a loneliness so vast it seemed to be part of the landscape, as vast as the snow and the dark. She was the only living thing for miles. She must have dozed, a cold, shivering sleep huddled by the growing fire. What woke her was not the wind. It was a sound, a heavy, rhythmic thudding. Eliza's head snapped up. Her heart hammered against her ribs. The banging was at the door. It was not the wind. It was a fist. She scrambled to her feet. Grabbing the one thing within reach, the heavy iron poker from the hearth, she backed away from the door, into the shadows. "Who's there?" Her voice was a terrified croak. The wind snatched the words. The banging stopped. Then a voice, torn by the wind, low and rough. "Shelter!" it bellowed. "For God's sake, ma'am, need shelter! The storm!" Eliza stood frozen. It was a man, a stranger. Everything she had run from in town, the stares, the assumptions, the danger of being a woman alone, was now standing on her doorstep. He could be a drifter, a thief, worse. The fist hammered again, weaker this time. "Please, I'm half froze." She crept toward the door, poker raised. She peered through a small crack in the wood. She could see nothing but a massive shape, coated in snow and ice, leaning against the doorframe. The code of the high country was plain. You did not let a man freeze, not even an enemy. If you did, the land itself would judge you. Her hand, shaking, went to the wooden bar. She lifted it. She pulled the door open. The man fell inside. He did not fall completely, but stumbled forward, catching himself on the doorframe before collapsing to his knees. He was a mountain of wet canvas, wool, and ice. The wind tore into the cabin behind him, scattering ash from the hearth. "Get in! Shut the door!" she yelled, shoving at the heavy wood. He turned, still on his knees, and helped her push it closed. He dropped the bar into place with a thud. The sudden silence, save for the fire and the wind, was deafening. He stayed there, on his knees, head bowed, breathing in great, ragged gasps. Snow and ice melted off him, forming a puddle on the floor. Eliza stood 10 feet away, the poker still held tight in her grip. "Thank you, ma'am," he finally panted, his voice a low rumble. He did not look up. "Who are you?" He slowly, painfully, pulled his iced-over mittens off. His hands were raw, chapped, and blue. He raised his head. He was not as old as she thought. His face was hard, weathered, and covered in a thick, dark beard crusted with ice. But his eyes, in the firelight, she saw his eyes. They were a clear, pale gray, and they were exhausted. They held no threat, only a deep, bone-weary cold. "Name's Levi Carter, ma'am." He finally looked at her, a quick, respectful glance. "I was running a mule train with supplies over the pass. Storm came on too fast. Had to leave my wagon, my mules. I got them into that lean-to of yours. I saw your chimney smoke." He looked rough. He looked like the trail itself, but he also looked decent. He had not tried to push past her. He was still on his knees. Eliza lowered the poker. "Just an inch. You're lucky you saw it." "Yes, ma'am, I am." The silence stretched. He was a large man, and he made the small cabin feel even smaller. "You can't stay on the floor," she said, the words coming out sharper than she intended. "You'll freeze solid." He nodded, pushing himself up. He was tall, taller than James. He had to stoop to avoid the low beams. "I won't be a trouble," he said. He kept his hands visible. He did not move toward the fire. He did not move toward her. She pointed with the poker. "There, by the door. You sleep there. You don't move from that spot." "Yes, ma'am." He did not argue. He did not complain. He just moved to the spot she indicated, a patch of floorboards near the drafty door. He sat, his back against the logs, and began the slow work of trying to pull off his frozen boots. He winced as he did it. Eliza watched him. She was wary, but the fear was slowly being replaced by something else, a shared predicament. The storm outside was the enemy, not the man inside, not yet. She turned her back to him, a deliberate act of trust, and went to the hearth. She poured water from her canteen into the small pot and set it over the flames. "I've got coffee," she said, not looking at him. "It's old." "Anything hot would be a blessing, ma'am." They sat in silence for a long time. The only sounds were the howling wind and the hiss of the snow as it hit the hot chimney. She gave him the coffee in James's old tin mug. He held it in both hands, letting the warmth soak into his fingers. He drank it black. He kept his word. He stayed by the door. He seemed to be trying to take up as little space as possible. "Storm seems to be settling in," he offered quietly. "After a time." "It does," she replied. She was on her cot, on the far side of the room, her own blanket pulled up to her chin. "My name is Eliza Morrison," she said, feeling it was only fair. "Mrs. Morrison," he nodded, as if to himself. They were two strangers, trapped in a single room, shadows dancing on the walls. Both of them were hiding. He was hiding from the cold. She was hiding from everything else. The firelight was warm, but the physical proximity to this unknown man was a different kind of cold, a cold tension. Eventually, the exhaustion of the ride claimed her. She lay down, her boots still on, the poker still resting on the floor beside her cot. She turned her face to the wall. Sleep came, but it was not restful. It was the dream again, the Red Dog Saloon, the smell of cheap whiskey and gunpowder. James, his face a mask of surprise, his hand clutching the ace of spades, the sound the bullet made. Then the faces, the women in town, Mrs. Gable, her mouth a thin line. "Too friendly," she hissed. The men, their eyes hungry. "Too friendly, too friendly." She woke with a start. A small, strangled cry caught in her throat. She was sitting bolt upright. The fire had burned down to glowing embers. The cabin was dark and cold. She was shaking. She was not alone. She saw his shape in the dark, a large shadow detaching itself from the wall near the door. He was standing. Panic, cold and sharp, seized her. She fumbled for the poker. "Mrs. Morrison?" His voice was low, soft, not threatening. She didn't answer. She just watched him, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest. He did not move toward her. He moved toward the pile of goods she had dropped by the hearth. He bent down and picked something up. It was the spare blanket, the thick, heavy wool one she had packed. He walked toward her cot. Eliza flinched, pulling back against the log wall. "Don't!" she whispered. He stopped. He was 3 feet away. She could not see his face in the gloom, only his silhouette. He did not say anything. He did not try to explain. He did not try to comfort her with words. He just stood there for a long second. Then, very slowly, as if not to startle a wild animal, he reached out. He did not touch her. He gently, impersonally, laid the folded blanket over her feet and legs, adding its weight to the thin one she already had. He stepped back. He looked at her for a moment, his head tilted, as if listening to the storm inside her. Then, without a single word, he turned and walked back to his spot by the door. He sank down, wrapped his own arms around his knees, and resumed his watch. Eliza stared into the darkness where he had been. She could feel the new warmth and weight of the blanket on her legs. She pulled it up, her hands trembling. It smelled faintly of pine and wool. She listened. The wind was still howling. The man by the door was breathing, a slow, steady rhythm. She lay back down. She did not turn to the wall. She kept her eyes on the shadows, but the terror had faded, replaced by a strange, quiet confusion. He had heard her cry, and he had not offered words. He had offered warmth. Eliza Morrison closed her eyes, and for the first time in months, The whispers in her head were silent. Eliza woke to a world of gray. The fire had burned down to a low, orange glow, and the single window was no longer black, but a flat, suffocating white. The glass was gone, buried. The storm had not passed. It had settled. She sat up, her muscles stiff and aching from the cold. The blanket Levi had given her was still pooled around her waist. She looked to the door. He was awake. He was sitting in the exact same spot, his back to the log wall, his knees drawn up. He was watching the fire. "Good morning," she said. Her voice was a dry croak. He turned his head. His eyes were clear, despite the lack of sleep. "Ma'am." "The window," she said, stating the obvious. "The snow is high," he replied, his voice a low rumble. "Higher than the sill, I reckon." He stood, a slow, stiff movement, and went to the door. He lifted the bar and pulled. The door did not move. It scraped, and then met solid resistance. He put his shoulder to it, a grunt of effort, and pushed. It opened perhaps 6 inches. Through the gap, Eliza saw not the porch, not the lean-to, but a solid, vertical wall of white. The wind screamed through the opening, sending a blast of fine, sharp snow into the room, stinging her face even from the cot. Levi shoved the door closed and dropped the bar. "We're trapped," she whispered. The word tasted of ash. He just nodded. "For a time. The drift is over the roof on that side." He looked at her, his gaze steady. "The storm is worse." She was trapped, not just in the cabin, but with him. The realization of last night, his quiet act of kindness, was now measured against the new reality. This was not a one-night shelter. This was a shared prison. She pushed herself off the cot, her fear making her movements brisk, practical. "We need to check supplies." James had not left much. He had brought things up for the summer, but had never intended to stay the winter. In a small, mouse-proof box, Eliza found what she was looking for: a half-full canvas sack of dry pinto beans, a slab of salt pork, hard as a rock and wrapped in cheesecloth, a small tin of coffee, mostly gone, a bag of flour, which she was relieved to find was still dry. It was not enough, not for one person for a winter, and certainly not for 2 people for a week. "We'll have to ration," she said, her back to him. She was organizing the meager supplies on the one small shelf. A half cup of beans, a slice of the pork, mornings and evenings, the coffee only in the morning. "That's a good plan," he said. She turned. He was not looking at the food. He was looking at her, as if she were the one in charge. In town, no one had looked to her for a plan. They had only looked at her with pity or with hunger. You can take the fire," she said, gesturing, suddenly uncomfortable with his stillness. "I'll measure the beans." He did not need to be told twice. He was a man who seemed to need work for his hands. He took the poker, her weapon, and used it to bank the coals, adding 2 precious logs from the small stack. He tended the fire with an economy of movement she had never seen in James. James had thrown logs on, building a great, wasteful roar. Levi Carter built a fire for survival, one that would last. The day wore on in a gray twilight. The wind never stopped. It was a high, thin scream one moment, a low, guttural roar the next. It was a living thing, an animal trying to claw its way in. The small cabin grew smaller. The shutter that she had noted on her arrival, the one banging by a single hinge, was driving Eliza mad. Thud, scrape, thud, scrape. It was the rhythm of the storm's impatience. After their small, grim breakfast of boiled beans and bitter coffee, Levi stood and looked at the window. "That shutter's going to tear loose," he said. "It's been banging for an hour. It's letting the cold in, too." He went to her. "Ma'am, Mrs. Morrison, if you've got a hammer and a few nails, I think I can secure it." She looked at the wall of white outside. "You can't go out there." I don't have to go far. Just lean out the window. But it has to be done. She found James's old toolbox under the cot. It was damp, and the tools were kissed with rust, but they were solid. She handed him the hammer and a small handful of nails. He nodded his thanks. He went to the window and, using the hammer's claw, began to pry at the packed snow and ice that had sealed it shut. It took him 20 minutes of hard, grunting work, but he finally broke the seal. He opened the window. The storm exploded into the room. A roar of wind and a blast of white powder filled the cabin, extinguishing half the fire and sending a cloud of ash over everything. "Levi!" she screamed, using his first name without thinking. He was already halfway out the window, his upper body submerged in the blizzard, fighting the wind that was trying to tear the shutter from his grasp. She saw him brace himself against the log wall, his boots slipping on the floor, and swing the heavy hammer. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound of the blows was swallowed by the wind. Then he was falling back inside, pulling the window shut, sealing it. He was a creature of ice, his hair, his beard, his shoulders, all caked in white. He stood there, breathing hard, but the banging had stopped. "You're freezing," she said. "It's done," he panted, brushing the snow from his face. He went to the fire and stood as close as he dared, his clothes steaming. Eliza sat on her cot, her heart pounding. She watched him. She watched his hands as he held them to the fire. They were not a gambler's hands, like James's, which had been pale and smooth. Levi's hands were chapped, the knuckles scarred, the fingers thick and strong. They were hands that knew how to work, how to fix things, how to hold a hammer in a blizzard. She looked away, ashamed of the direction of her thoughts, but she could not stop the observation. He was quiet, and he was useful. And in this small, cold room, useful was a more powerful thing than handsome or rich had ever been. He was kind. He had not complained. He had not asked for more food. He had simply helped. The silence of the cabin pressed in. The only sound now was the wind, its shriek slightly muffled. She had to fill the silence. "You seem to know your way around a hammer." He glanced at her, a small, almost shy look. "I've done my share of work, lived on the trail a long time." He turned back to the fire. "Used to ride with cattle outfits, pushing herds from Texas up to Kansas." "That's hard country," she said, remembering stories she'd heard. "It is." A darkness passed over his face. He seemed to be seeing something in the flames. "Hard country and hard men." "You don't ride with them anymore?" she prodded, gently. He was quiet for a long time. "No, ma'am." He reached for the poker and idly pushed at a log. "Saw too much killing. A man gets tired of it. A man sees what it does to folks." He looked up, at the old rifle James had left mounted on the wall over the hearth. "Don't much like guns anymore." Eliza followed his gaze, a man who looked like he could break another man in two. And he did not like guns. It was a contradiction. The men she knew, like James, had loved their guns. They had worn them as part of their pride. Levi seemed to regard the rifle as a kind of failure. She did not tell him her story. She did not tell him that a gun, a stupid argument, and a poorly played hand of cards had made her a widow. She just nodded. She busied herself with the few dishes they had, washing them in a small basin of water she had melted from snow. She kept her back to him, but she was aware of every small sound he made, the scrape of his boot on the floor, the low sigh as he stretched his back. She was watching him from the corner of her eye, a strange, tense awareness that had replaced the initial terror. The day passed. The night came. The next morning, the world was still white. On the third day, a new, more urgent problem arose. The path to the outhouse. "Ma'am," Levi said, his voice low with embarrassment, "we're going to need to clear a path." She had been dreading this. The small lean-to was only 20 yards from the cabin, but it might as well have been a mile. "There's one shovel," she said. "In the lean-to, but I don't know if we can even reach it." "The mules," he said, his face tightening. "I've got to check my mules." It took them 10 minutes to force the cabin door open against the new drift. They stepped out not onto a porch, but into a trench. The snow was waist-deep, a powdery, shifting sea. The wind had sculpted it into fantastic, beautiful, and terrifying shapes. "Stay behind me," he ordered. It was the first time he had given her a direct command. He plunged into the snow, and it was like watching a man plunge into water. He was breaking a trail, using his whole body to push through the drift. Eliza followed in the narrow channel he created, her lungs burning from the cold air. The lean-to was almost completely buried. One of the mules, a hardy gray, brayed in terror as they approached. They found the shovel. "The animals first," he said. He spent an hour digging them out, feeding them from the small bags of oats he'd had strapped to his pack. His face was grim. "They won't last long like this." Then they began to dig the path. It was brutal, back-breaking work. They took turns. One would shovel for 15 minutes, throwing scoop after scoop of heavy, wet snow until their arms burned and their lungs ached. The other would huddle against the cabin wall, trying to catch their breath, the wind stealing any warmth they had generated. They did this for nearly 2 hours, a grim, silent partnership. The world was nothing but the scrape of the shovel and the howl of the wind. Eliza was shoveling. She was tired. Her arms felt like lead. She took one more scoop, turned to throw it, and her foot slipped on a patch of ice buried beneath the powder. She went down. She did not just fall, she tumbled, sideways, off the narrow path and into the deep, untouched drift. She was buried instantly. The snow was up to her neck, soft and cold, and she was stuck. She tried to move her legs, but they were pinned. She heard Levi stop shoveling. He turned. He looked at her, a white, snow-covered heap in a hole. She looked at him, his beard crusted with ice, his face red from the cold. It was ridiculous. The shame, the grief, the fear, it was all so heavy. But this was just ridiculous. A sound bubbled up in her throat. It was dry, rusty. She had not heard it in almost a year. It was a laugh. She laughed, a short, barking sound, and the laugh sent a puff of white powder up from the drift. Levi stood there, shovel in hand, and watched her. He did not laugh, but the corners of his eyes crinkled. The hard line of his mouth softened. "You find a soft spot, Mrs. Morrison?" he asked. "I seem to be stuck," she said, still chuckling. He plunged the shovel into the bank and walked over to her. He stood above her, a giant in the snow. He reached down one hand, just one. It was bare, his mitten tucked into his belt. "Well," she said, "I suppose I should get up." She took his hand. His grip was solid, warm, and dry. He did not tug. He pulled. With one smooth application of strength, he hauled her straight up out of the drift. She came free with a whoosh, and her momentum carried her forward. She stumbled against his chest. She was flush against him for one shocking second. She felt the solid wall of his chest, the wool of his coat, the heat coming off him. She smelled the faint scent of wood smoke and cold air. She pushed back immediately, as if burned. "Thank you. Best stay on the path," he said, his voice level. He turned and picked up the shovel, as if he had not just held her. They finished the path in silence, but when they got back inside, shaking with cold and exhaustion. The air in the cabin was different. The ice had not just been broken outside. That night, the storm reached its peak. The wind did not just howl, it shrieked, a high, thin sound that sounded like a woman mourning. The logs of the cabin groaned under the pressure. Eliza and Levi sat by the fire, rationing their supper of boiled pork. Suddenly, the fire did something strange. It spit a cloud of sparks, and then a puff of thick, black smoke rolled out of the hearth. Eliza coughed, waving her hand in front of her face. "What is it?" Levi was on his feet in an instant. He stared at the chimney. "It's the smoke. It's not drawing." As he said it, a second, larger cloud of smoke poured into the room. It was thick, acrid. It smelled of soot. "The chimney!" he gasped, his eyes wide. "It's capped with snow or ice." The room was filling fast. The smoke was dropping from the ceiling. A heavy, stinging blanket. Eliza's eyes were streaming. She could not breathe. "Out!" Levi yelled. He grabbed her arm, his grip like a steel trap, and dragged her toward the door. He fumbled with the bar, shoved the door open, and half threw her out into the snow trench they had dug. They stumbled out into the blizzard, into the black, screaming night. Falling to their knees, they gasped in the clean, freezing air, their chests heaving, coughing up the black soot. We have to fix it," Eliza panted, her throat raw. "Stay here!" Levi shouted over the wind. He looked up, squinting into the driving snow. "I've got to clear it." "How? You can't get on the roof." "We'll die in there if I don't," he yelled. "And we'll freeze out here if we don't have a fire." He plunged into the snow, fighting his way toward the lean-to. Eliza watched, helpless, as he grabbed a long pole, one he used for his mule train. He did not try to get on the roof. He did the only other thing he could. He began to climb the massive snowdrift that had buried the side of the cabin. He was climbing toward the chimney. He had taken his mittens off to get a better grip, his bare hands sinking into the snow. He was climbing a vertical wall of ice and wind. "Levi, be careful!" she screamed, but the wind stole her voice. He reached a spot where he was level with the roof line. He braced himself, his feet sinking deep. Then, with all his strength, he began to jab the long pole up at the top of the chimney. He was fighting the wind, which was trying to tear the pole from his hands. He jabbed again. Eliza held her breath. He gave one final, powerful thrust. There was a crack, and a shower of black ice and soot fell from the chimney. He slipped. He fell, sliding down the full length of the drift, landing in a heap at the bottom. "Levi!" He was up in a second. "It's done," he called. He ran back to her, grabbing her arm. "Wait, let the smoke clear." They waited for 5 agonizing minutes, shivering in the dark, the cold seeping into their bones. Then they dashed back inside. The air was still hazy, but the smoke was rising properly. The fire was drawing. Levi was soaked to the skin, his coat, his shirt, his trousers, all of it. Get your clothes off," Eliza stammered, not looking at him. "You'll catch your death." He did not argue. He hung his heavy coat from a peg. He stood by the fire and, with his back to her, he pulled the sodden wool shirt over his head. Eliza, sitting on her cot, pretended to be busy with her blanket, but she saw. He turned to wring the water from the shirt, and the firelight illuminated his body. He was lean, but powerfully built. His back and chest were crisscrossed with old, white lines, but one scar stood out. On his left side, just over his ribs, was a puckered, ugly, star-shaped scar. It was not a cut, it was a bullet wound. He had said he did not like guns. Someone had used one on him. She snapped her eyes away, her cheeks burning, her heart doing a strange, fluttering dance. He sat by the door, his back to her, and wrapped a dry blanket around his bare shoulders. He said nothing, giving her the privacy of his back, but the image of that scar, of the hard planes of his chest, was burned into her mind. Later, after he had hung his shirt to dry, he went to his hands. They were a mess. From climbing the snow, from the ice, they were bright red, cut and bleeding in 6 places. Eliza saw him wince as he tried to flex his fingers. She did not think. She went to the small chest where she kept her few personal things. She pulled out a strip of clean linen and a small tin of salve. She walked over to him. He was sitting on the floor by the door. She knelt in front of him. "Let me see your hands," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "They're fine, ma'am." "They're not. You'll lose the use of them if they get infected. Give them to me." He hesitated. This was different from the fall. This was not an accident. This was a choice. He slowly, reluctantly, held them out. She took his left hand. It was huge in her own. It was cold and rough as bark. Gently, she began to clean the cuts with a bit of melted snow. She dabbed the salve onto the raw skin. He did not flinch, but she felt the muscles in his forearm tense. She was kneeling at his feet, in the dark, touching him. Her breath was shallow. She could feel the heat radiating from his bare chest, just a foot away. She began to wrap the linen strips, her movements precise, over the palm, around the thumb, across the knuckles. Her fingers brushed his skin, his wrist. She finished the first hand. She started on the second. She was aware of him watching her. She could feel his gaze on the top of her head. When she was done, her hands lingered. She was holding his wrists, her thumbs resting on his skin. She had finished the task, but she did not let go. She looked up. He was already looking at her. His gray eyes, in the low firelight, were not cold. They were intense. They were watching her with a stillness that was more powerful than any words. He was not looking at her with pity, or hunger, or contempt. He was just looking. Neither of them moved. The cabin, the world, seemed to shrink to the small space between them. The wind, the storm, it all faded. There was only the sound of the fire, and the sound of her own blood rushing in her ears. She dropped his hands as if they were burning coals. That should help," she stammered, scrambling to her feet. She fled to the safety of her cot, her back to him. Hours later, the cabin was dark. The fire was embers. The storm had found a new, lower voice, a dull roar. Eliza was not asleep. She was lying on her back, staring at the ceiling she could not see. Her mind was reeling. The fall, the chimney, his hands, his scar. She was twisting her wedding ring, round and round, a nervous, grieving habit. "You're going to wear the skin right off your finger." His voice came from the darkness, low and rough. She gasped, pulling her hand from under the blanket as if she'd been caught in a crime. "I thought you were asleep," she whispered. "I'm not," he said, just a shadow from the other side of the room. She was caught in her most private, vulnerable ritual. The shame of it, the loneliness. It was too much. The words just fell out of her, aimed at the shadows. "He's been gone," she whispered, the words thick. "James, my husband. He's been gone 10 months, and I keep waiting to feel like myself again, but I don't." She had not meant to say it. She had not meant to tell this stranger, but she could not stop. "I came up here to sell this place. I was running, from the town, from the whispers. Now I'm trapped." She took a shaky breath. "I don't know who I am. Not as James's wife, not as his widow. I don't know who I am anymore." The admission hung in the cold air. It was the deepest, truest thing she had said in a year. The silence that followed was absolute. The storm seemed to be listening. She expected him to say nothing. She expected him to be asleep. He waited a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was not soft. It was not kind. It was just true. "You're surviving," he said, very quietly. "That's enough for now." Eliza let out a breath she did not know she had been holding. A single, hot tear rolled from the corner of her eye and into her hair. He was right. That was all this was. Surviving. It was enough. She lay back, her hand still, and for the first time, she listened to the sound of his breathing. It was slow and steady, a solid presence in the dark, and she was no longer afraid of it. It was day 3, or perhaps day 4. Eliza had lost count. The storm had not broken. It had simply settled into a state of permanent, howling rage. The world outside was a shifting, violent white, and the world inside had shrunk to the smell of wood smoke, the sound of the wind, and the presence of the man by the door. The food was almost gone. They ate their breakfast in silence, 2 spoonfuls of boiled beans each, and the last gritty dregs of the coffee, watered down until it was just brown-tinted water. When they finished, Eliza looked at the empty pot, then at the near-empty bean sack. The salted pork was a sliver. The flour was half gone. "We can't," she said, her voice quiet. "We can't just wait." Levi was mending one of his mule's harnesses, his bandaged hands working slowly, methodically. He did not look up. The storm's not letting up. Nothing to do but wait. Wait for what? To starve? The sharpness in her own voice surprised her. "There's game out there. Deer, rabbits. They have to come down from the high ridges in this." He finally raised his head. His gray eyes were steady. "It's a blizzard, ma'am. You can't track in it. You'd be lost in 50 yards. "We," she said, "have to hunt. You have to hunt." She looked at him. The breadth of his shoulders, the strength she had seen when he'd cleared the chimney. He was a man of the wilderness. He should be the one to provide. Levi looked down at the harness in his lap. "I can't." "You can't?" she asked, a cold frustration creeping in. "Or you won't, because of what you said about guns." He slowly, deliberately, set the leather harness aside. He moved his right leg, stretching it out toward the fire. He pointed. "Because of this." "I don't," she started. "This leg," he said, his voice flat. "It's no good in a drift. I'd sink like a stone, and I'd be no use to you at all. It was hard enough just digging to the outhouse." Eliza looked at his leg, at the thick wool trousers. She remembered the scar she had seen on his side, the bullet wound. Was it from the same? "No," he said. "The one on my side was just a scrape. This one," he tapped his thigh, "this one was a .44. It went clean through, but it shattered a piece of the bone. It healed bad. I can ride for days. I can walk on a flat road, but I can't put my weight on it in deep snow or climbing a steep grade. I'm a broken piece of trail equipment. Mrs. Morrison, I'm good for fixing shutters. I'm no good for hunting." There was no self-pity in his voice. It was a simple statement of fact. Eliza stared at him. The one man, the strong man, was crippled. The responsibility, which she thought she had briefly shared, came crashing back onto her shoulders. It was all on her. "So we die," she whispered. The hopelessness, a physical weight. Levi did not answer. He just watched her. He was waiting. She felt a flush of anger. At him for being broken, at James for dying, at the storm for trapping her. She stood up and marched to the hearth. She looked up. The rifle, James's rifle, a heavy Winchester resting on 2 wooden pegs. She had never fired it. James had taken her out once to teach her, but she had been afraid of the noise, the kick. He had laughed. "A woman's got no use for this. Lizzie, not when she's got me." She had him no longer. She reached up, her fingers trembling, and took the rifle down. It was heavier than she remembered. Cold, ominous. "What are you doing?" Levi asked, his voice sharp. "Surviving," she said, throwing his own words back at him. "That's enough for now, isn't it?" She found the box of cartridges James kept in his toolbox. Her hands were shaking so badly she dropped 2. She fumbled, loading the rifle, the metal cartridges clicking into place. "Mrs. Morrison," Levi said, standing up. He limped a step toward her. "Eliza, you cannot go out in that. You will die." "And we will die in here," she countered, her voice trembling but hard. "I'm not going far, just to the edge of the trees. I saw tracks before. I'll be sheltered from the worst of the wind. I won't get lost." You don't even know if it's clean, he argued. You don't know if it will fire straight. I know it's the only chance we have. She grabbed her coat, the one he had worn to fix the chimney. It was still damp. She put it on. I am a terrible shot, she admitted, her back to him as she pulled on her mittens. But I'm desperate, and desperation has to account for something. She unbarred the door. At least let me, he said, his voice raw with frustration. I can sit on the porch. I might get a shot. You said it yourself, she said, looking over her shoulder. You can't go in the drift. The porch is buried. I'm the one with 2 good legs. She shoved the door open. The wind ripped it from her hand and slammed it against the cabin wall. The trench they had dug was almost full again. She slung the rifle over her shoulder and stepped out into the white. The world was gone. There was no sky, no ground. Just a roaring, shifting, blinding white. The cold was a physical blow, stealing her breath. She pulled her hat down and began to wade through the new snow. She kept the cabin wall to her left. She would not lose it. She followed it to the corner, then turned, estimating where the trees, the small copse of pine, would be. It was only 30 yards. It felt like a mile. The snow was up to her thighs, and every step was a battle. She held the rifle high, protecting it from the snow. The wind screamed in her ears, a chorus of all her fears. You're weak. You're alone. You're a fool. You will die here. She reached the trees. They were a dark, groaning tangle. But they broke the wind. The silence in their lee was almost as frightening as the noise. She leaned against a thick trunk, her chest heaving. She was an idiot. She had been gone 2 minutes and she was already exhausted. Levi was right. She should go back. And then she saw it. It was not a deer. It was not even a fox. It was small. Just a flicker of gray-white movement against a snowbank. A snowshoe hare. It was huge, as large as a small dog, its winter coat a perfect camouflage. It was nibbling at the bark of a buried willow. It had not seen her. Eliza's heart stopped. Food? Meat? She raised the rifle. It was so heavy. She rested the barrel on a low-hanging pine bough to steady it. Her hands were shaking. Not from cold, but from adrenaline. She tried to line up the sights. The metal was freezing, and the wind was still whipping at her. Don't think, just do. The hare stopped nibbling. Its long ears swiveled. It sat up. It was looking at her. She pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening. It was a massive, violent clap of thunder that punched her in the shoulder, knocking her backward into the snow. The rifle flew from her hands. Smoke, thick and white, obscured her vision. Her ears were ringing. Her shoulder throbbed. She lay in the snow, stunned. She had missed. She had failed. Then, through the ringing in her ears, she saw it. A dark, spreading stain on the snowbank. The hare was gone, but the red was there. She scrambled up, ignoring the pain in her shoulder, and plunged through the snow. She found it. She had not missed. It was a clean shot. She grabbed the hare by its long, powerful back legs. It was heavy. It was warm. She began to laugh, a wild, hysterical sound that the wind snatched away. She had done it. Eliza Morrison, had done it. She trudged back to the cabin, the wind at her back now. She was not cold. She was not afraid. She was a hunter. She fell through the doorway, the rifle in one hand, the hare in the other. She dropped the animal onto the floor with a wet thud. Levi was by the fire, his face a mask of worry. He had been standing by the door, waiting. He looked from her face, to the rifle, to the hare. You're bleeding, he said, his voice hoarse. She touched her cheek. A low branch had cut her. She had not even felt it. It's just a scratch, she said, her voice giddy. But this, she said, kicking the hare. This is stew. Levi stared at her. His face, which she had only seen in lines of exhaustion, or worry, or quiet consideration, now held something new. It was admiration. It was a profound, open respect. He looked at her as if he had never truly seen her before. "Well, I'll be damned," he whispered. "You did it." "I did," she said, and the pride in her voice was pure. And it was her own. The cabin was filled with the rich, savory smell of stew. Eliza had found wild onions she had dug and dried last summer. She had used a handful of flour to thicken the broth. It was a feast. They ate in silence. Not the awkward silence of the first night, but a comfortable, shared silence of deep, satisfied hunger. The stew was hot, and it was life. When they were finished, they sat by the fire, their bellies full. The storm seemed to have quieted, or perhaps they were just no longer listening to it. "You're a good shot," Levi said, packing tobacco into a small, well-worn pipe. He had not smoked, she noted, until now. He was conserving everything. "I was lucky," she said. "I was terrified. My shoulder is going to be black and blue tomorrow." Luck is part of it. Being brave enough to try is the other part. He lit the pipe with a splinter from the hearth, and the sweet, musky smell of tobacco filled the room, chasing away the last of the fear. He smoked for a few minutes. Eliza watched the fire, the warmth, the food, the safety. It had lowered all her defenses. "You asked me what I was running from," she said, her voice very low. He stopped smoking, his hand pausing on its way to his mouth. He looked at her. He waited. "I told you my husband was murdered," she said, staring into the flames. "I didn't tell you the rest of it." "You don't have to," he said quietly. "I want to." The words were true. She needed to tell someone who was not from that town, someone who did not have the answers already written on their face. James, he liked to gamble. He liked to drink. He liked to make people think he had more money than he did. He was shot in the Red Dog Saloon, over a poker game. They said he was cheating. I don't know, maybe he was. She paused, twisting the wedding ring on her finger. That's not the part that made me run. It was at the funeral, the women, Mrs. Gable, the preacher's wife, they would look at me, the way they whispered." Her voice grew thick, and she fought to keep it steady. "They said I drove him to it. They said I was young, and he was—" She could not say it. "They said," she took a breath, "that he couldn't keep me satisfied, that I was too friendly with the hired men, that I drove him to drink and to cards and to his death because I wasn't a proper, content wife." She finally looked at him. His face was a shadow, but his eyes were fixed on her. "It was a lie. I was just lonely. He was gone all the time. But it didn't matter. The lie felt truer to them. And the men," her voice dropped. "The men, they started to look at me differently, not with contempt, with that look, the one you see in a starved dog's eyes. Like I was meat, like the rumors were true, and I was just available. A widow, alone. They stopped seeing me. They just saw what they wanted. I couldn't breathe," she whispered. "I couldn't walk to the mercantile without feeling their eyes on me. I felt dirty. I felt trapped. So I came up here. I was going to sell this place to a man in town, Mr. Croft, just to get away, to run where no one knew my name." She finished. The story was out, hanging in the small cabin. It sounded so small and so huge. Levi was silent for a long time. He tapped his pipe against the hearth, the small thwack-thwack the only sound. He looked at her, his face full of a quiet, hard anger. But it was not anger at her. "You didn't kill him," he said. His voice was a low growl. "You didn't hold the gun. You didn't make him cheat at cards. And you don't owe anybody their story." He said it with such simple, profound certainty that the tears she had been holding back finally fell. "You don't owe them," he repeated, softer this time. "You owe you. That's all." "You're surviving," he had told her. Now he was telling her why. She wiped her face, a rough, angry gesture.
It's foolish, crying over whispers.
It ain't foolish, he said. Words can be bullets, too, harder to pull out. The warmth between them was no longer just from the fire. It was something new, something that had been forged in the hunt and sealed with her confession. It was trust.
Well,
she said, trying to lighten the air.
We can't just sit here and brood. Do you know how to play cards?
A small smile touched his mouth. I know a few games, but I should warn you, Mrs. Morrison, I'm a terrible gambler.
That's a relief,
she said, pulling out James's old, worn deck.
So am I.
They played by the firelight, sitting on the floor. They played Old Maid. They played a simple game of rummy. He was right. He was a terrible card player. He lost, and he lost with a quiet grace. And she found herself laughing. Actually laughing, a sound that felt as rusty and as good as the one in the snow. It grew late. The fire burned low. The wind, as if to remind them, howled outside, a counterpoint to the warmth inside.
I should bank the fire,
she said, her voice heavy with sleep.
I'll get it,
he said. They unrolled their separate bedrolls. But this time, it was different. He did not go to his spot by the door, and she did not go to her cot. The cold was too deep, and the fire was the only source of warmth. They laid their blankets on the floor, on the worn bearskin rug in front of the hearth. Not close, not touching, but not on opposite sides of the room. They were sharing the small circle of warmth. She lay on her side, her back to him. He lay on his back to her. She listened to the sound of his breathing, slow, steady. She was acutely, painfully aware of him. Every inch of her skin seemed to be alive. She could feel his presence, the heat of his body, even from 3 feet away. She had told him her shame, and he had not flinched. He had not pitied her. He had defended her. She had been running from the hunger in men's eyes. But his eyes were not hungry. They were quiet. They were respectful. When he looked at her, he saw her. She turned over, her movements small, rustling. He was still awake. He was on his back, staring at the ceiling, his bandaged hands laced over his chest. She lay there, watching him. The firelight played on his face, on the hard line of his jaw, the dark beard. She had been so cold for so long. She did not think, she acted. She reached out. Her hand, small and pale in the gloom, traveled the space between them. She did not touch his face. She did not touch his chest. She laid her hand, palm down, on his, the one resting on his stomach. He froze. His breathing stopped. He did not move. He did not pull away. He did not grab her. He just turned his head very slowly and looked at her. His eyes were dark, but she could see the question in them. She did not pull her hand back. She left it there, a statement, a plea. He watched her for a long, long moment. He was reading her face. He was making sure. Then he turned his hand over, his rough, calloused, bandaged palm meeting hers. He threaded his fingers through hers. His grip was light. He did not pull her closer. He waited. She moved. She slid the 2 feet that separated them, her blanket dragging with her. She rested her head on his shoulder. She could feel the solid, steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. He was so warm. He said nothing. He just held her hand. His other arm came up, slowly, and rested on her back, a gesture of pure, simple comfort. They lay like that for a long time, just breathing. "Eliza," he whispered, his voice a low rumble in her ear. She tilted her head back. He was looking down at her. His face was so close. He lowered his head. The kiss was not what she expected. It was not hungry. It was not desperate. It was slow. It was tentative. His lips were dry from the cold, and his beard was rough against her skin. It was a question. She answered. She pressed into him. Her fear, her grief, her loneliness, all pouring into this one. Simple touch. The kiss changed. It deepened. His hand left hers and came up to her jaw, his thumb brushing the line of her throat. His other arm, the one around her back, tightened. He pulled her flush against him. It was not a kiss of comfort. It was a kiss of fire. His mouth was on hers, and it was hot, and it was demanding, and she was meeting him. She was meeting him with a year's worth of unspoken, untouched need. Her hand clutched at his shirt. She could feel the hard muscles of his chest. It was too much, too fast. It was everything she had been afraid of, and everything she had craved. She tore her mouth from his, a small, choked gasp. She was trembling. He did not hold her. The second she pulled back, his arms loosened. He let her go. He did not look angry. He did not look smug. He looked pained. He pushed himself up onto one elbow, looking down at her. His eyes were dark, his breathing as ragged as her own. "You don't have to run into another storm," he said, his voice thick. He was giving her an escape. He was giving her his respect. She lay there, her heart hammering, the cold air hitting her face where his warmth had been. He was right. This was a storm. It was wild, and it was dangerous. She looked at him, the man who had covered her with a blanket, the man who had fixed her shudder, the man who had listened to her shame, the man who had respected her no before she even said it. She was so tired of running. "Maybe I want this storm," she whispered. The night did not end in fire. It ended in ice. After he backed away, after he gave her that choice, Eliza had remained on the floor, trembling. He had given her the escape, and her pride, mixed with a terror she could not name, had taken it. She had pulled her blanket back to her cot, her back a stiff, unyielding line. He had returned to his spot by the door. He had said, "Good night, Eliza," his voice low and thick, but he had not called her ma'am. She had not answered. She had only listened to the sound of the wind, her skin burning where his beard had been, her mouth tasting of him, and she had felt the most profound, aching loneliness of her life. Now, it was morning. The cabin was a new kind of prison. The air, which had been filled with confessions and the smell of stew, was now thick with words left unsaid. It was brittle. Eliza rose from the cot, her shoulder a deep, throbbing ache from the rifle's kick. She went to the hearth to build the fire and found Levi already there. He was kneeling, just as she had knelt before him. Adding kindling to the coals, he had his shirt on. "Good morning," he said, his voice flat. He did not look at her. "Morning," she replied, her voice just as clipped. She turned to the water bucket. He stood, and for a moment, they were trapped. She was by the shelf. He was by the fire. He had to pass her to get to the door. He moved. She flattened herself against the log wall, her head turned away, as if studying the grain of the wood. He passed by. He did not touch her, but she felt the heat of him, the sheer size of him, and she had to clench her fists to keep from reaching out. He checked the door, looked out at the wall of white, and then began to methodically check the patches on his boots. The day was a silent, agonizing dance. They moved around each other, two bodies in a space built for one, their lives reduced to a series of near misses. Their hands brushed as she passed him the tin cup. Their shoulders nearly touched as he came in from checking the mules, his coat covered in snow. Each time, a spark. Each time, they recoiled. The storm, uncaring, raged on. The wind was a constant shriek. "We have to shovel the path again," he said in the afternoon, his first full sentence. "I'll get the shovel," she said. They worked in the gray, biting cold. The silence between them heavier than the snow. They did not speak. They did not laugh. When she slipped, he did not reach for her. She caught herself on the wall of the trench, and he pretended not to see.
It was worse than the fear. It was worse than the hunger. This awful, aching want.
They ate their supper, the last of the hare stew, now watery and thin, sitting on opposite sides of the hearth. He was on his blanket by the door. She was on her cot, the bearskin rug between them. The place where they had kissed was an empty, accusing space. The wind howled, and then a new sound. Drip. Eliza tilted her head. Drip. A small, dark spot appeared on the worn blanket at the foot of her cot. She looked up. The roof, overburdened with snow, had sprung a leak. Drip, drip, drip.
Damn it,
she muttered. She moved her legs. Levi was on his feet in an instant. Where?
Here,
she said, pointing.
It's coming through the cot is getting soaked.
He looked up at the ceiling, his face grim in the firelight. It's the snow. The heat from the cabin is melting it from below, and it's finding a way in. He limped over, grabbed the empty stew pot. Move your blankets. She stood, gathering her bedding. He placed the pot on the cot, and the plink of the water hitting the iron was the loudest sound she had ever heard.
You can't sleep there,
he said. She looked at the floor, the damp cold. You take the rug, she said. I'll sit by the fire. Don't be a fool, he said, his voice rough, not with anger, but with exasperation. We both sleep by the fire. It's the only dry place. He did not wait for her answer. He went to his own spot, gathered his blankets, and laid them out on the bearskin rug. He laid them on one side. Then he looked at her. It was not a question. It was a statement. We are two adults. We are cold. We are dry here. Her heart was hammering. She took her own bedding from the cot and laid it down on the other side of the rug. There was a space between them, a hand's breadth, a canyon. They lay down, wrapped in their separate blankets. They lay on their backs, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, where the water was finding its way through. Plink, plink, plink. The wind screamed.
I hate this,
she whispered, her voice shaking.
I hate this storm. I hate this sound.
He was silent for a long moment. It'll pass. They always pass. Not this one. She felt him turn on his side. She could feel his body, his warmth, facing her. She did not move. Eliza.
His voice, her name. It was a plea.
She turned, slowly. He was there, inches away. His face was a landscape of shadows and firelight. His eyes were dark, and they were full of the same ache she felt. I am not him, he whispered, his voice a low gravel. I am not the men in town. I know, she breathed. I am trying to be respectful. I know, she said again. He raised his hand, the one she had bandaged. He did not touch her. He just held it in the space between them, palm up, an offering. Last night, she had offered her hand. Tonight, he was offering his. She looked at his hand, at the rough, scarred knuckles, at the white linen she had wrapped around them. This hand had fixed her shudder. It had dug her out of the snow. It had saved her from the smoke. This was not what fear felt like. She moved. She slid across the small space and into his heat. She put her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, and with a low groan, he pulled her in. This was not a kiss of question. It was an answer. He did not stop. She did not stop. His mouth was on hers, and it was the stew, and the coffee, and the hunt, and the fire. It was all of it. He tasted of survival. He rolled, pulling her under him, his weight a solid, comforting truth. His hands, those rough, bandaged hands, were in her hair, at her waist, his touch a strange mix of desperation and reverence. It was a storm, the one she had wanted. She was unbraiding her hair. He was unbuttoning her shirt, their movements clumsy, frantic. They were wrapped in blankets, skin meeting skin in the freezing air. and the contrast was so sharp it made her gasp. His breath was hot on her collarbone. She had dreamed of this, of a touch that was not a taking. He was murmuring, not words, just her name. Eliza. He said it like a prayer, like a man finding water after a decade in the dust. He said her name as if it were something sacred, something he had been waiting his whole life to be allowed to say. And she, who had hated her own name, who had heard it whispered with contempt and spat with accusation, heard it new, in his mouth, on his lips. It was not the name of a broken widow. It was the name of a woman. He was inside her, and it was a deep, aching relief. It was a joint, a bone, a life, setting back into place. There was the sound of the wind, the plink of the water in the pot, and the soft, ragged moans that were torn from her throat. She clutched at his back, at the hard, scarred muscles, and held on as if he were the only solid thing in a world that had turned to ice. He held on, too. Afterward, the world was silent. The storm, the wind, the dripping water, it was all gone. There was only the sound of his heart, hammering under her ear. She was curled into his chest, her face buried in the warm, wool and smoke scent of his skin. He was stroking her hair, his bandaged hand rough but gentle. She felt safe. It was a feeling so foreign, so dangerous, that it made her want to weep. She was not safe. She was in a buried cabin with a wanted man, and she was a disgraced widow. But in the circle of his arms, in the warmth of their bodies under the pile of blankets, she was, for this one night, safe. The silence stretched. The fire crackled. "I was going to sell this place," she whispered, the words muffled against his chest. She felt the muscles in his chest tighten. He did not speak. His hand in her hair went still. "The day I rode up here," she continued, "I had the flyer from Mr. Croft, the land agent. I was going to sign his paper, take his money, and just go, vanish." She tilted her head back to look at him. His eyes were on the ceiling, his jaw set. "And now?" he asked, his voice very quiet. "I don't know," she said, and it was the most honest thing she had ever said. He said nothing for a while. He just held her. He knew, she realized, what she was saying. She was not just talking about land, she was talking about her life. He pulled the blanket higher, tucking it around her shoulders, and closed his eyes. In the morning, she woke up alone. The bearskin rug was empty. For one blind, panicked moment, she thought he was gone, that he had left, that it had been just that. Then she smelled coffee. He was standing by the hearth, fully dressed, his back to her. He was pouring hot water into the pot. The fire was built high. She sat up, pulling the blanket around her. "Levi?" He turned. His face was... She could not read it. He was not smiling, but he was not angry. He looked pensive. "Morning," he said. He brought her a cup. He had used the last of the coffee. "You should have," she started. "You earned it," he said, cutting her off. He gestured to the wall. "You shot the hare. I made the coffee." She took the cup. Her hand was shaking. She was a stranger in her own body. Everything was new, raw, tender. He turned away from her, and she saw what he had been looking at. On the wall, near the hearth, where the firelight would always hit it, James had taken a knife and carved into the log, J.M. plus E.M., 1880. It was crude, selfish. He had scarred the cabin, marked it as his, just as he had marked her. Levi was staring at it. "He did that the first summer," Eliza said, her voice thin. "He was proud of his whittling." Levi ran his rough fingers over the letters. "Did you love him?" The question was a bullet. It went straight in. It was not cruel. It was necessary. He had a right to ask. Last night had given him that right. She looked at the carving. She thought of James, His loud laugh, his handsome face, the way he had swept her away from her family.
"Yes,"
she said. The word was solid.
"I did. He was the first man who ever looked at me like I was special. I thought it was love. It was loud. It was exciting."
She stood, wrapping the blanket around her. She walked to stand beside him. They looked at the carving together. "But," she said, "it was not this." She did not know how to say it.
"I loved who I thought he was,"
she said, finding the words.
"But I don't think I ever felt with him what I felt last night. I was never
quiet. With him, I was always worried, always trying to be who he wanted." She looked up at Levi. He never saw me. Not really."
"I see you," he said.
His voice was thick.
"I know,"
she whispered. And in that moment, the carving lost its power. It was just letters on a wall. The storm broke on the 5th day. The wind died. The world outside the window was no longer a mess of swirling white. It was just still and bright. The sun on the snow was blinding. A new rhythm began. They were not strangers. They were not lovers, not in the way of the world. They were a pair. The cabin, which had been a prison, became a home. "That latch on the lean-to is broke," he announced that morning, after checking his mules. "It's a wonder they didn't get out and wander."
"It's been broken since last summer,"
she said. "James was going to fix it." "Well," Levi said, and he picked up James's knife. He sat on the floor by the door, and he carved. He did not carve letters. He carved a new latch, a smooth, functional piece of pine, with a peg that fit perfectly. He whistled while he did it, a low, tuneless sound. Eliza watched him, and as he worked for her, she worked for him. She went to the flour sack. She had thought it spoiled, that the damp had gotten to it. But she dug deep, and at the bottom, the flour was dry. It was not much, but it was enough. She found the last of the baking soda, a pinch of salt. She made biscuits. They were not light, fluffy biscuits. They were hard, dense, salty pucks of flour and water, baked in the iron skillet. When he came back in, his hands red from fitting the latch in the cold, the cabin smelled of bread. He stopped and just breathed it in. He looked at the skillet.
"You made biscuits."
He said it like she had made a miracle. "They're probably terrible," she said, flushing. He took one, bit into it, and closed his eyes.
"They're not terrible," he said.
They sat and ate the biscuits with the last of the salt pork, and they talked. "That roof patch won't hold," he said, pointing up with a half-eaten biscuit. "Come the spring, that whole section will need to be retarred. You'll need to strip the shingles."
I don't know how to do that."
"It's not hard," he said, as if it were obvious. "You just need a hot day and patience." He looked out the window, at the wall of the trench. That south-facing wall. That's where the sun hits first. You could have a garden there. Potatoes, beans. It'd grow. A garden, spring. He was talking about a future, a we.
"We could,"
she said, her voice small.
"We could fix the place up."
The hope was so bright, so new. It was almost painful. It glittered, just like the sun on the snow. And it was that hope that made him pull back. He set his biscuit down. The lightness in the room vanished. "Eliza." He was cleaning the rifle, her rifle, wiping it down with an oily rag he'd found. "There's something you need to know," he said, not looking at her. His voice was low. She waited. "I told you I used to ride with cattle outfits. I told you I saw too much killing." He stopped. He ran the rag over the barrel, over and over. "I didn't tell you I was part of it." Her blood went cold. "What do you mean?" "I was in Texas, near the border. I was younger, angrier." He squinted, as if at a bad memory. "There was a foreman,
A man named Tully. He was not a good man. He was cruel. To the horses, to the men. He had a girl, a young Mexican girl. Kept her in his rooms. He stopped, his knuckles white on the rag. One night, he was drunk. He was beating her. She ran. I stepped in. He looked up, and his eyes were the gray of the storm. I told him to leave her be. He went for his gun. I was faster. You shot him? She whispered. I did, he said. He died. It was self-defense, but he had kin, his brother. A man with money and a long memory. He put a price on my head. He called it murder. I've been running ever. He stopped. No, not running. Just moving north, changing my name. I left Levi Carter behind a long time ago. But that's who I am. He looked at her, his face full of a pain that was older than the storm. I am a wanted man, Eliza, and that man in Texas, he might still be looking, if he ever found out I was here. He did not have to finish. He was putting her in danger. The hope, the garden, the spring, it was all turning to ash. She saw his honesty. It was a gift. It was a burden, and it demanded one of her own. The land agent, she said, her voice shaking. Mr. Croft, the one who wants to buy this place. He looked at her, confused by the change. I lied to you about him. I said he offered to buy it. He did, but it was more than that. She took a deep breath. He knew about the rumors, about me. He threatened me. Levi stood up. The rifle was forgotten. What did you say? He came to the mercantile, she said, the words tumbling out, the shame of it hot on her face. He said he had heard stories that a woman alone, a pretty widow, was unprotected. He said it would be a shame if those whispers started up again, that it might be hard for me to live. He said if I sold to him for his cheap price, he would make sure he would protect my reputation. Levi's face was a mask of cold, white rage. His hands were clenched into fists. He was blackmailing you, he growled. Yes, he was using what they said about me to steal my land. He touched you? Levi's voice was a low, dangerous thing. No, he was polite. That was the worst part. He was smiling, like a snake. Levi took a step. He looked like he was going to punch the wall. He looked like he was going to walk out that door and kill Silas Croft. You're not selling, he said. It was not a question. It was a command. You're not selling this place. Not to him. The anger in him, the sheer, protective, male anger. It was the same thing she had seen in James, and it terrified her. She stood up, too. She faced him. No, she said. He stopped. No? No, she said, her voice shaking but finding its steel. You don't get to tell me what I do. James told me what to do. The town told me what to do. Mr. Croft is telling me what to do. She took a step toward him. You are not them. It is my land. It is my reputation. It is my choice. She had never, in her life, spoken with such strength. Levi stared at her. The rage in his face did not vanish, but it shifted. It changed. The anger at Croft remained, but his anger at her, it was not there. He looked at her, and his face softened. The respect, the admiration she had seen when she'd brought home the hair, it was back, tenfold. He nodded, a slow, deep nod. You're right, he said. It is your choice. He stepped closer, but it was not a threat. He was not crowding her. He was joining her. Then choose, he said, his voice quiet, intense. Choose what you want, not what fear wants. The choice, once made, hung in the air. Choose what you want, not what fear wants.
The words echoed in the small cabin. A challenge. Eliza had been so defined by fear, fear of judgment, fear of loneliness, fear of Mr. Croft, fear of the hard, hungry looks of men that she no longer knew what she wanted. She only knew what she was running from. Levi had given her back her own will, but the new silence in the room was heavy with it. They were no longer two bodies huddled for warmth. They were two people, with pasts, with names, with choices. And the choices were all dangerous. The silence was broken. It was not the wind. The wind had died. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, it was a new sound, a sound from outside. It was the rhythmic, muffled thud crunch of a horse, a heavy one, breaking through the snow. Levi was on his feet in a single, fluid motion. The man who limped was gone. This was a man of pure, coiled instinct. He moved to the window, to the small crack in the shutter, and his entire body went rigid. "Get away from the window," he said, his voice a low, hard command.
What is it?
Eliza's heart seized. "It's a rider," he said, his eye still pressed to the crack. "He's wearing a star, a deputy star." Eliza's blood turned to ice. "From town? It's probably Deputy Hannaford. He's just checking." "He's not just checking." Levi turned from the window, and his face was a mask she had never seen. It was the face of a hunted animal. "He's not on the main trail. He's cutting across the ridge. He was looking for this place." He grabbed her arm. "You have to hide me." "What?" "Now. Eliza. There's no time." He was dragging her, not to the door, but to the middle of the room. "Is there a cellar? A place under the floor?" "Yes," she panted, her mind reeling. "The root cellar, under the rug, but—" "Move!" He threw the bearskin rug aside, revealing the thick, planked trapdoor with its iron ring. He was pulling at it, his breath hissing. "He can't find me here." "Why?" she cried, the panic making her voice high. "You said it was self-defense." "The law doesn't care." He got the door open, revealing a square of black, cold earth. The smell of damp and potatoes rose up. "My name, my real name. It's not Levi Carter." He said it fast, a confession at the edge of a grave. "It's Jacob Holt. I've been running for 6 years. That man I told you about, the foreman, his brother is a senator. He put a bounty on me. Not for a marshal. For anyone. $500. Dead or alive." The horse was closer now. They could hear its breathing. "A deputy," he said, his eyes boring into hers, "would see $500. He would see a promotion. He would not see a man who saved a girl. He would see Jacob Holt." He swung his legs into the hole. "You have to lie. You have to be alone." "Levi." She was trembling so hard she could barely stand. "My name is Jacob," he said, his voice raw. "But the man you've been with, the man who— that's Levi. You tell this deputy. You tell him you've been alone since the storm started. You hear me?" I can't." "You can—" His face was hard, desperate, pleading. "You shot that hare. You can do this. Don't let him in. Talk to him from the door. Please, Eliza. My life is in your hands." He dropped into the darkness. "Close it." Her hands were shaking. She looked down at him. He was a shadow in the cold earth. She slammed the heavy door down. The thud was final. She threw the bearskin rug over it, her hands fumbling, trying to smooth the wrinkles, trying to erase the last 5 days. A heavy fist pounded on the door. "Mrs. Morrison! Eliza Morrison! This is Deputy Hannaford. I know you're in there. I see the smoke." She was breathing in small, terrified gasps. Jacob Holt, under her feet. A wanted man. A murderer. In the eyes of the law. And she was hiding him. She went to the door, her legs unsteady. She did not lift the bar. She pressed her face to the wood. "Deputy, what is it? I'm not decent." A chuckle from the other side.
It's near noon. Ma'am, I'm not here for a social call. Just checking. This storm was a bad one. Folks in town were worried, and, well, I'm looking for someone. Her heart stopped. I'm alone. I've been alone since the storm began. The lie came out. It was thin, and it tasted of ash. Is that so? His voice was muffled, but it was sharp. Funny, because Silas Croft, he said you'd ridden up here just before the storm, but he didn't see you come back, and I was down at the mercantile. They said a mule train was past due. A fella named Carter, he never showed up either. He knows. I don't know any Mr. Carter, she said, her back pressed against the door, her hands splayed wide. I've just been here, trying to stay warm. It's been terrible. There was a long silence from the other side. The only sound was the jingle of a horse's harness. You're sure about that? Eliza? Hannaford's voice was different, softer, more dangerous. Because there's word out, from a marshal down Texas way. They're looking for a man, a fella named Jacob Holt. Killed a ranch foreman some years back. He's tall, dark beard, scarred, last seen drifting north, working cattle. He'd be just the sort to be running a mule train, and he's worth $500. He was describing Levi. He was describing the man under her feet. I've never heard of him, she whispered. Her mouth was dry. Well, Hannaford said. He sounded unconvinced. He's dangerous. A killer. You're a woman alone here. Eliza. We all know that. The insinuation was clear. A woman alone. A woman with a reputation. A woman who might be accommodating. The shame of it, the same shame she had felt in town, was now being used by the law. I am alone, deputy, she said, and her voice was suddenly hard. And I am cold, and I am tired. Another long silence. All right, Mrs. Morrison, he finally said. His voice was all business again. I'll take your word for it, for now. He was not done. The thaw is coming, he said. I can feel it. When that pass is clear in a few days, I'll be back. I'll ride up here and I'll check on you again. Make sure everything is proper. The threat was unmistakable. You have a good day, ma'am, he said. She waited, her whole body shaking, her ear pressed to the door. She heard him mount his horse. She heard the heavy crunch, crunch, crunch as he rode away. She waited 5 full minutes, her heart a trapped bird in her chest. Then she collapsed onto the floor, right on top of the trap door. She was sobbing, dry, terrified sobs. She had lied to the law. She had harbored a fugitive. She was, in the eyes of the world, a criminal. She fumbled with the rug, pulled the door open. Levi, Jacob, was standing at the bottom of the ladder, his face a pale shadow. He climbed out, stiff from the cold. He was covered in dirt and frost. She scrambled away from him, backing up until she hit the far wall. You, she panted. You. He stood, dusting the cold earth from his shoulders. He was not the man she had made love to. He was a stranger, a dangerous stranger. He's gone. You lied to me, she whispered. No, he said, his voice hard. I told you. You lied, she screamed. The terror, the shame, the adrenaline, it all broke, and it came out as rage. You're not Levi Carter. You're Jacob Holt, a wanted man, a killer. You let me lie for you. You put your life in my hands. You said, you put my life in your hands. He's coming back, and he's going to find you. And what should I have done? He yelled back, his own control snapping. Stepped outside? Let him shoot me for $500? Let him hang me? You should have told me. She was weeping now, her fists clenched. You should have told me who I was in this cabin with. Who you were with? He stalked across the room, and for the first time,
She felt a flicker of fear of him. He was not the gentleman who tended the fire. He was the man who had shot a foreman. He stopped, just inches from her. He was shaking, but not from cold, from a rage that was 6 years old. "Who were you with?" he said, his voice dropping to a low, lethal growl. "You were with the man who covered you with a blanket when you cried in your sleep. You were with the man who fixed your damn chimney in the middle of a blizzard. You were with the man who listened to you, who held you, who... He could not say it. He turned away, punching his bandaged fist against the log wall. "Jacob Holt," he said, his back to her, "is a ghost. He's a name on a piece of paper. He died in Texas 6 years ago. The man in this cabin. The one who held your hand. The one who saw you. That's Levi. That is my real self. The man you see. That's who I am." He turned, and his face was a ruin of pain and exhaustion. "I never lied to you, Eliza. I didn't tell you all of it." She stared at him, the anger draining out of her, leaving only the cold, hard truth. He was right. The man she had made love to, the man she had trusted with her story, was Levi. Jacob Holt was the shadow, the reason, the past, but Levi was the man. "He's coming back," she whispered, her fight gone. "I know," he said. He said, after the thaw. And as if the world was listening, the next morning the sound began. It was not the plink of the leak in the pot. It was a new sound, a universal sound. Drip, drip, drip. It was coming from the roof, from the eaves, from the trees. It was the sound of the world, unfreezing. The sun, which they had prayed for, was suddenly a menace. It was high, and it was bright, and it was warm. It was a judgmental, all-seeing eye. The snow, which had been a white, clean, protective blanket, was turning gray. It was shrinking. The drifts were melting, revealing the hard, muddy ground beneath. The storm had broken. The siege was over. But the real threat, the outside world, was now on its way. The thaw was a clock, and Hannaford was coming. Eliza sat at the small, rough-hewn table. She had not slept. Levi had not slept. They had sat in the cabin all night, listening to the drip, drip, drip of the melting snow. She was faced with the choice again. Choose what you want, not what fear wants. She could run, she could pack her things, ride down the mountain, and leave. She could leave Levi to his fate. She could go to Mr. Croft, sign the papers, and disappear. That was what fear wanted. Or, she pulled a piece of paper toward her. It was one of the few pieces she had left. She found a nib, a small bottle of ink that had not frozen. Levi was by the door, his pack rolled. He was watching her. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice hollow. "I'm making my choice," she said. Her hand did not shake. She dipped the pen. She began to write. She did not write to Deputy Hannaford. She wrote to Mr. Silas Croft. "Mr. Croft, I have received your most recent offer for my land. I must decline. The cabin and the property are no longer for sale." She paused. She knew what this meant. He would be angry. He would come. He would spread his rumors. She had to protect herself. She had to build a fortress. She dipped the pen again. "My circumstances have changed. The storm was clarifying. I am no longer a widow, unprotected. I have remarried. My new husband is a good, strong man. He is a wonderful shot. We will be staying on the property. We will be working the claim. We will be building a garden. Do not contact me again. Sincerely, Mrs. Eliza." She stopped. She looked at Levi, who was watching her, his face unreadable. She signed her name, Mrs. Eliza Morrison. She folded the letter. She had made her choice. She was not running. She was staying. She was fighting. She had lied to protect Levi. Now she had lied to protect herself. Levi watched her,
He saw the new steel in her spine. He saw the fortress she was building, and he knew it was not for him. He was a ghost, a wanted man. He was danger. He picked up his pack. He slung it over his shoulder. "You can't stay," she said, not looking at him. "He'll be back. He'll find you." "I know," he said. "I'm leaving." Her head snapped up. "What?" "I'm leaving," he said, his voice flat. He walked to the door, picked up his hat. I will not endanger you, not like this. You are building a life here." He looked at the letter. You're a good woman, Eliza. You deserve a garden. You deserve a spring. You don't deserve me. You don't deserve a hanging at your front door." "So you're running," she said, her voice dead. "Again." "I'm not running," he said, and his voice was full of a pain that tore at her. I'm setting you free." He opened the door. The bright, warm, melted air flooded the cabin. It smelled of wet pine and mud, the smell of the thaw. He stepped outside. She did not move. She let him go. She heard him walk to the lean-to. She heard the bray of his mules. She heard the jingle of the harness. He was actually leaving. He was giving her up to save her. And she, who had been defined by fear, who had run from whispers, who had been blackmailed and threatened, felt a new, different kind of rage. It was the rage of a hunter. She did not run. She walked. She walked out of the cabin, her feet sinking into the mud, and she followed him to the lean-to. He was there, cinching the saddle on his mule. He did not look at her. "Levi," she said. "Don't," he said, his back to her. "Don't make this harder." You coward," she whispered. He froze. His hands, gripping the cinch, went white. He turned, slowly. His face was a mask of agony. "A coward. I am trying to save your life." "You are trying to save yourself," she said, stalking toward him. "You are running, just like you've always done. You'd rather be a ghost than a man. You'd rather I be safe and alone than... "Then what?" he cried. "With me? With a dead man? With Jacob Holt? Hannaford will be back, and he'll bring men. And what do you do then? Eliza, you lie again, you fight them, you die with me." "I don't know," she screamed. "But I am not running. I am done running." She was in front of him. She grabbed the front of his rough canvas coat. "I am not that woman anymore. I am not the woman who ran up this mountain. I am not the woman you found. You changed me." I have to go," he was pleading with her. "No." She pulled him. She was not strong, but her will was iron. She slammed him back against the rough-hewn wooden beams of the lean-to, and she kissed him. It was not the tender kiss of the night before. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss of passion. It was a kiss of rage. It was a kiss of choice. It was a kiss of ownership. It was a brand. She kissed him hard, her teeth clicking against his. She tasted the cold air on his lips, the fear, the resolve. She kissed him until he stopped fighting, until his hands, which had been pushing her away, came up and grabbed her waist, pulling her in. His groan a sound of pure surrender. She broke the kiss, but she did not let him go. She rested her forehead against his, her breath coming in ragged gasps. They were both shaking. "You held me through the storm," she whispered, her voice a raw, fierce thing. "The one outside, and the one in here." She pressed her hand to her heart. "I won't let fear take that from me." He did not leave. That kiss in the lean-to, a kiss of anger and ownership and choice, had been an anchor. It had held him. He had unfastened the cinch on his mule, his hands shaking, and he had followed her back into the cabin. He had not run. He had stayed. The thaw came, not as a flood, but as a slow, agonizing melt. The world turned from white to a deep, sucking brown. The snow receded, revealing the bones of the land, the sharp gray rock,
the skeletons of deer taken by the winter, and the mud. The mud was everywhere. Spring came slowly, reluctantly. It was a season of work, not beauty. They mended the cabin together. The threat of Deputy Hannaford was a cloud on the horizon, a storm waiting to break. But the roof over their heads was leaking now. They worked. Levi, his legs still a hindrance, but his will a force of nature, climbed onto the roof. He found the split shingles, the holes left by winter's rage. Eliza, no longer afraid of the rifle, took it and hunted. She brought back 2 more hares and a brace of grouse. They were partners. She would be inside, kneading their last bit of flour into a dense, flat bread, and she would hear the steady thump, thump, thump of his hammer overhead. It was the sound of a future being built. It was the sound of a man who was not a ghost. They planted potatoes. Levi had found a small, half-rotted sack of them in the lean-to, left by James and forgotten. Most were spoiled, but a few had pale, desperate eyes. They dug in the cold, wet earth on the south-facing side of the cabin, where Levi had said a garden would grow. They planted them, side by side, their hands in the mud.
I've never grown anything,"
Eliza confessed, her hands caked in the black soil. "You put it in the ground," Levi said, his own hands gentle as he placed a cutting. "You give it a chance. You protect it from the frost. The rest, it's just hope." He looked at her, his face smeared with dirt, and she saw it. This was their hope, these potatoes, this mended roof, this small, hard-won patch of land. In the nights, they were a different kind of partners. They slept on the bearskin rug, which they had nailed to the floor as their permanent bed. The cabin was no longer a prison or a shelter. It was a home. They learned each other's bodies, not with the desperation of the storm, but with the quiet, steady rhythm of the work. They learned the scars, the calluses, the lines of exhaustion. They learned to be quiet together. But the thaw, in bringing life, also brought the world. One afternoon, when the first pale green buds were appearing on the aspen trees, Eliza was washing the breakfast tins. Levi was outside, splitting wood. The steady thwack of his axe was a comfort, as familiar as her own heartbeat. Then the sound stopped. Eliza went still, her hands in the gray water. The silence that followed was absolute. "Eliza." His voice, it was not a call. It was a warning. It was low, and it was from the front of the cabin. She dried her hands, her heart a cold stone. She walked to the open door. Levi was standing there, the axe in his hand, his body a statue. He was looking down the trail. 2 riders were coming up the path. The mud was thick, and their horses were laboring. One was Deputy Hannaford. His star was a bright, silver glint in the noon sun. The other was a stranger. He was thin, dressed in a dark, city-style suit that was spattered with mud. He had a narrow, pale face and small, clever eyes. He was not a lawman. He was not a cattleman. He looked like a rat. Hannaford reined in his horse, his eyes taking in the scene. He saw the mended roof. He saw the patch of turned earth for the garden. He saw Levi, his axe held low, his shirt damp with sweat. And he saw Eliza, standing in the doorway, her face pale but her spine straight. "Afternoon, Mrs. Morrison," Hannaford said, his voice polite. He did not look at Levi. You seem to have found some help." "I told you, Deputy," Eliza said, her voice clear. "My circumstances have changed." "So I see." Hannaford finally turned his gaze on Levi. "You're a handy man with an axe." Levi said nothing. He just watched. The thin man on the horse had not taken his eyes off Levi. He was smiling, a small, unpleasant smile. "He's more than handy, Deputy," the man said, his voice thin as a reed. "He's fast, aren't you, Holt?" Levi's hand tightened on the axe. "Jacob Holt," the man said,
savoring the name. It's been a long time. 6 years. You look thicker. The North agrees with you. Who are you? Levi asked, his voice a low growl. Name's Blevins, the thin man said. I was just a kid, clerking for Senator Tully's law office. But I remember the day he got the news. I remember the wires he sent. I remember the price he put on your head. He looked at Hannaford. $500. Deputy, gold. Hannaford's face was grim. He looked at Levi. That true? You're Jacob Holt? Levi looked at Eliza. She was standing on the porch, frozen. He was giving her a chance to run, to go inside, to pretend she was not part of this. Eliza walked down the one step and stood in the mud, beside him. Levi turned back to the deputy. My name, he said, and his voice was clear, is Levi Carter, but yes, I am the man you are looking for. He let the axe fall, soft, into the mud. He raised his hands, his palms open. I'm done running, he said. He was surrendering. He was doing it to save her, to keep the violence from her porch, from her garden. Well, Hannaford sighed. He seemed tired. He reached for the rope on his saddle. That makes this easy. Then Mr. Blevins here, he rode all the way from Cheyenne. Got in yesterday. Said he had a tip. Seems Mr. Silas Croft was in town, complaining about a widow who'd been taken in by a drifter. Eliza's blood ran cold. Croft, it had been Croft, his petty, spiteful revenge. Jacob Holt, Hannaford said, swinging his leg over his horse. You are under arrest for the murder of... No. Eliza's voice was not loud, but it cut through the air like a blade. Hannaford stopped, his boot halfway out of the stirrup. No, she said again. She walked forward, past Levi, and stood directly in front of Hannaford's horse, forcing the animal to take a step back. Blevins just looked amused. Mrs. Morrison, Hannaford said, his patience wearing thin. This is Lawman's business. You step aside. You'll take him through me, she said. Levi's breath hitched. Eliza, don't. She ignored him. She looked up at Hannaford, at the man, not the star. You came here because of Silas Croft's whispers. Deputy, you came here for $500. I came here, Hannaford said, his voice hard, to arrest a wanted murderer. He is not a murderer. That's for a judge in Texas to decide, ma'am. No, she said. It's for the truth to decide. And the truth is that I've been busy. She was not the trembling woman in the cabin. She was not the scared widow. She was a fortress. You've been busy? Hannaford asked. This is a waste of time. Blevins snapped, his reedy voice high. Arrest the man! In the week since the thaw, Eliza said, her voice ringing in the clear spring air. I have not just been planting potatoes. I've been to town, not just our town. I've been to Cheyenne. I've been to the telegraph office. Levi was staring at her, his face a mask of disbelief. You told me a name, Levi, she said, her eyes locked on Hannaford. You told me you saved a girl, a Mexican girl. You didn't know her name. You just knew she ran. Eliza, what did you do? Levi whispered. I did what you taught me. She said, I hunted. She reached into the pocket of her apron. She pulled out a thick, folded packet of papers, wrapped in oilcloth. I sent a wire to the U.S. Marshal in El Paso, she said, her voice steady. I told him the story Levi told me. The story of the foreman, Tully, and the girl. I told him the year and the name of the ranch. And I asked him to find her, to find anyone who had worked that ranch. Blevins' smile was gone. His name, Eliza said, her voice shaking with a cold fury, is Jacob Holt, but the girl's name, the girl he saved, her name is Maria Sanchez, and she is alive, and she is living in a convent in New Mexico, And she is not a girl anymore. She is a woman. And she remembers. She held up the packet. This, she said, is a sworn, notarized testimony from Sister Maria Sanchez, detailing the years of abuse she suffered at the hands of Amos Tully, detailing how, on the night of August 4th, 1875, Amos Tully tried to kill her, and how Jacob Holt stepped between them and saved her life. Hannaford was staring at the packet. He did not move. And this, she said, pulling another letter from the packet, is a letter from a man named One-Eyed Tom, a cowhand who also saw what happened. And this, she said, is my own testimony. And this, she said, her voice finally breaking, is the copy of the letter I sent to the governor of this territory, asking for a full pardon for the man who saved my life in that storm, just as he saved hers. Blevins slid off his horse. Those are lies, forgeries. That's just paper. It's a legal case, Mr. Blevins, Eliza said, and it's one I will make in a courtroom. If you take him, you take me, you take this. She shoved the packet of papers at Deputy Hannaford. He instinctively took it. He sat there on his horse, looking at the papers in his hand. He looked at Blevins, his face pale and furious. He looked at Levi, who was standing tall, his hands at his sides, his eyes only for Eliza. He looked at Eliza, her face flushed, her jaw set, a woman who had, by herself, moved heaven and earth. Hannaford sighed. It was a long, heavy sigh. The sigh of a man who was paid to do a job he suddenly did not want to do. He folded the papers. He did not read them. He tucked them into his own coat. Mr. Blevins, Hannaford said, you rode a long way for nothing. What? Blevins shrieked. Deputy! That is a wanted man. That is $500. No, Hannaford said. He swung his leg back over his horse. That is a man who is standing on his own property with his wife. That is a man who seems to have a powerful lot of friends. He looked at Levi. You, Carter, Holt, whatever your name is. You stay here. You plant that garden. You cause me no trouble. I won't, Deputy, Levi said, his voice thick. You do, Hannaford said. And I'll come back, and I'll read those letters, and I will find a reason. You understand me? Yes, sir, Levi said. Hannaford turned his horse. Blevins, you're coming? You can't do this, Blevins was sputtering. The senator will hear. I'll have your star. Hannaford looked down at the small, furious man. This territory's had enough death, he muttered. And it's had enough of men like you. Now get on your horse. He turned and rode away. Blevins stared, his mouth open. He looked at Levi. He looked at Eliza. He looked at the axe in the mud. He said nothing. He climbed on his horse, a broken, defeated man, and he followed. They watched them ride down the path, watched them until they were just two small dots in the vast, green, muddy valley. Eliza was still standing in the mud. She was shaking, the adrenaline leaving her, her legs suddenly weak. Levi turned. He did not speak. He walked to her. He stood in front of her for a long second, his face working. He looked at her, at the woman who had just saved him. He knelt. He knelt in the mud, this tall, proud man, and he put his arms around her waist. He buried his face in her apron, his shoulders shaking. He was not crying. He was just breathing. He was holding on to her as if she were the only solid thing in the world. She put her hands in his hair. She held his head. I've got you, she whispered. It's all right. I'm here. That night, a gentle rain began to fall. It was not the biting sleet of the storm. It was a soft, warm, spring rain. It was the sound of the garden drinking. It was the sound of the world washing itself clean. In the cabin, by the light of the fire, he had bathed her. He had taken the tin basin
with a gentleness that was almost painful. He had washed the mud from her feet, her hands, her face. Now, she was doing the same for him. They were on the bearskin rug. The rain was a soft drum on the roof he had mended. She made love to him. It was not the desperate, frantic coupling of the storm. It was not the hurried, quiet comfort of the days after. This was new. There was no fear. There was no desperation. There was only choice. She chose to touch his face. She chose to trace the line of his jaw, the shape of his scar. She chose to kiss him, slow and deep, a kiss that was a promise, a vow. And he received her. He let her lead. He let her give. He was a man who had been given his life back, and he was giving it, in turn, to her. His hands on her were not a taking. They were a worship. It was slow, and it was deep, and it was quiet. It was the sound of two souls who had been broken, mending. Later, as the rain softened to a whisper, she lay curled against him. His arm was heavy and warm around her waist. She was watching the fire. She reached up, her left hand. She twisted the ring, the old, familiar, cold gold band, James's ring. She had been a wife, a widow, a scandal. She slipped it from her finger. It left a pale, indented line. Levi was watching her. He said nothing. She got up, her bare skin glowing in the firelight. She took the ring. She went to the hearth. She knelt. With her fingers, she dug at a loose stone, one that had always been wobbly. She pulled it free. Underneath was the dark, cool, packed earth that was the foundation of the cabin. She looked at the ring one last time. She thought of James, the man she had loved, the boy who had made her laugh. She was grateful for the girl he had seen, but she was not that girl anymore. She pressed the ring into the earth. She did not bury it with anger. She buried it with respect. It was the past. It was the foundation. But it was not the house. She pushed the stone back into place. It was solid. She went back to the rug. Back to Levi. He opened his arm, and she lay down, her head on his chest. He said nothing. He just held her. The final scene. It was summer. The high country was alive with color. The aspens were a deep, vibrant green. The sky was a blue she had forgotten existed. The cabin was a home. The porch, which had been buried, was now rebuilt. It was wider. It had 2 chairs. Eliza sat in one, her hands in her lap. Levi sat in the other, whittling a small, wooden bird. The sound of his knife was a soft, peaceful shush. Smoke curled from the chimney, a thin, blue-gray ribbon against the blue sky. The garden, her garden, was a riot of green. The potato leaves were high and strong. I came here to run, Eliza said, her voice quiet, conversational. She was speaking to the mountains, to the sky. I was so afraid. I wanted to sell this place and disappear. She turned to him. But maybe I was always coming home. Levi set his whittling down. He looked at her. He had been looking at her for months, but his eyes were still full of a quiet wonder. He reached over. He did not take her hand. He wrapped his arm around her waist, pulling her chair closer until it touched his. He put his arm around her, and she leaned her head against his shoulder. Together, they sat on the porch they had built and watched the smoke curl from the chimney of the home they had saved. The storm had passed. It had passed for good. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope it found you well. This is a new space, and I'm so grateful to have you here for the first chapter of From Wild West. I'd love to know where in the world you're listening from. Please leave a comment below and tell me. If you enjoyed the story of Eliza and Levi, I hope you'll subscribe to the channel so you don't miss what's coming next. And please, share your thoughts in the comments. What did you feel? What did you think of Eliza's choice? I read every one. Thank you for being here.